The communist Vietnamese had the home court edge. They were able to fight the war on their own terms, on their own turf, and in some cases, under it. These are the tunnels of the Cu Chi region, near Saigon. For some communist soldiers, it was the perfect place to hide, crawl out, and attack the Americans, then disappear back into the ground.
We'll be going down one of the smaller tunnels in this place. It's gonna get pretty tight. Basically, there was like a whole underground tunnel system. The villagers of the Cu Chi region, they were masters at tunnel warfare during the Vietnam War. And they took about 20 years to build these tunnels. We're about 30 feet under the ground right now. I'd say I've got about 18 inches of space here. Wide, I've got about 3 feet high. And when the village was under attack, everyone would come under here. These little narrow corridors. As you can see, they've been carved out to the left, to the right, and basically it's like an underground city down here.
The American response to tunnel warfare? Blast them out. Around Cu Chi and many other places in Vietnam, craters from numerous U.S. bombing raids still pit the landscape. The bombing hurt the communists, it didn't stop them, and the U.S. military presence grew. By 1967, nearly 500,000 American soldiers were in Vietnam. The numbers didn't seem to matter. GIs attacked and were attacked everywhere they went, from the hills to the rice paddies to the jungle of the Mekong Delta.
So one of the biggest problems the American soldiers had fighting the Vietnam War was that they were constantly being hunted by the Viet Cong in these kind of conditions. Really thick, dense jungle, poisonous snakes, cobras swimming around in these really dark, muddy waters, and they just never knew what was around the next bend.
By 1968, some top military commanders began to feel that the communist Vietnamese were beaten, or at least contained. On January 31st, the communists proved them wrong. 70,000 communist soldiers launched a massive surprise attack across South Vietnam. It happened during Tet, the Lunar New Year. It became known as the Tet Offensive. Few places in South Vietnam were spared.
This is the old imperial palace in the city of Hue, home of Vietnam's last emperor. In the 1968 Tet Offensive, it was seized by North Vietnamese troops, and the Americans were ordered to take it back. What happened next on these ancient palace grounds is something neither side will ever forget.
The communists were dug in, and American troops quickly found that they would have to destroy the place in order to capture it. They did. From a strictly military standpoint, Tet was a U.S. victory. American GIs retook every inch of ground and killed more than 50,000 enemy soldiers. But the communists scored a political success. During the offensive, they managed to break inside the U.S. Embassy in Saigon, once thought to be impregnable, and pictures like these flashed across TV sets back home. It helped convince the American public that the war would not be easily won. Before the Tet Offensive, American support for the Vietnam War had been eroding. After Tet, it began to hemorrhage. 1969, Richard Nixon became president. He continued the U.S. bombing of North Vietnam. Mr. Nixon also had used troops invade Cambodia in an attempt to destroy Viet Cong bases there. But eventually, he withdrew U.S. combat troops from Vietnam. In March 1973, the last of them came home. By spring of 1975, the communists had advanced to the gates of Saigon. The city was in a state of panic. Some people looked to the Americans for help at a place they knew they'd be.
And this is it, the U.S. Embassy. Thousands of Vietnamese who had worked for the Americans for years showed up here that day hoping to catch a lift out of the country. It was total chaos.
By that time, the only way out was on one of the choppers leaving from the roof of the embassy. But when the last Americans were evacuated, the choppers stopped coming. On April 30th, 1975, the North Vietnamese communists took control of the city. The democratic South Vietnamese government, which the United States spent nearly 3 decades, upwards of $165 billion, and more than 58,000 lives trying to save had fallen.